I never thought I'd be the type of person to stumble into a story straight out of a thriller, but here I am, sitting in my apartment at 2 a.m., staring at my laptop, and trying to convince myself I'm not already in over my head. I've been holding this in for months because, honestly, it sounds insane if you don't see the evidence for yourself. But I guess I should start from the beginning, because nothing makes sense if I skip that part. I grew up in a perfectly normal suburban neighborhood outside Chicago. My parents, what I thought were my parents, were nice, kind, relatively boring people. Dad worked in insurance. Mom ran a small interior design business from home. I had a normal childhood: school, sports, a couple of close friends, the occasional awkward teenage crush. Everything was textbook suburban American life. Except, I wasn't really theirs. At least, that's what I found out last year. It hit me like a punch to the chest. I was 22 when my mom casually dropped it during a conversation that was supposed to be about nothing. We were in the kitchen, eating some frozen pizza she insisted was gourmet. It wasn't. And she just looked at me, straight-faced, and said, "You know, you're adopted, right?" I froze mid-bite, and I swear my mouth tasted like metal. "Wait, what?" came out in a high-pitched whisper. She nodded, almost bored, like it was the most normal thing in the world. My dad didn't say a word. Of course, the next hours were a blur of questions and half-answers. I don't think either of them expected me to actually care. They didn't give me any info about my biological parents, just some vague story about complications during childbirth and that I'd been found by the right people. They probably thought I'd shrug it off, go back to my life, and never dig further. But I didn't shrug. Something about the way she said it, it felt off. There was a tension in her voice that didn't fit a casual revelation about adoption. I started digging. At first, it was just trying to find my birth certificate. I figured, okay, maybe they know something. Maybe there's some registry, some paper trail. What I found instead was nothing. There were layers of red tape, sealed documents, fake records. That was the first time it clicked that this wasn't going to be a neat little adoption story. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to erase my past. And the more I dug, the more I realized that the people I thought were my family had reasons to make sure I never found out the truth. Then came the emails. At first, just small things, anonymous messages that would pop up in my inbox late at night. No subject lines, no headers, just a few sentences typed in a shaky font. One said, "Stop digging. Some truths are dangerous." I laughed it off at first, assuming it was some weird hacker joke. But the next day, I found a man sitting across from me at a coffee shop who looked familiar. He didn't approach me, didn't speak, just watched, eyes never leaving mine, until I left. That was the first time I realized this wasn't just about curiosity anymore. Someone, or something, didn't want me digging into my past. I pushed harder. I hired a private investigator, someone discreet, someone who had experience with adoption cases. The first thing he said to me was, "Kid, your file is heavily redacted for a reason. Whoever wanted you found a way to cover every trace of your early life. That's not normal." He started tracking my biological family, running old public records, even digging through obscure Social Security and hospital archives. That's when the first real clue dropped. A name, my birth mother's name, tied to a shell corporation that had appeared out of nowhere and dealt in. Well, that's when I started getting nervous. Money laundering, offshore accounts, some type of weird import-export business. Nothing illegal enough for headlines, but enough to make me realize these weren't normal people. Then came the rumors. I started digging in forums, public records, and I found a thread that mentioned someone with the same last name as my birth mother. It was cryptic, almost like a diary entry. "They know too much. They can't be trusted. We must protect the family." The post was months old, but it sent chills down my spine. Protect the family? Protect them from what? From who? And why did it feel like it was talking about me? That's when I started noticing other things around me. Subtle things at first. Cars parked outside for hours. People following me when I left work. The feeling of being watched. I even caught my phone acting weird. Random calls I didn't answer. Texts that disappeared. It's like someone was monitoring me. And then, late one night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. No one spoke, just heavy breathing. When I hung up, my chest was pounding, and I realized, fully, that the people I was trying to learn about, they could be dangerous. I know it's a lot to take in. Honestly, I'm still not sure I believe it all myself sometimes. But there's no turning back now. I've crossed a line into a world I didn't even know existed, and I can't stop. Because if what I'm discovering is true, then my entire life has been built on lies. Lies that someone is willing to kill to protect. And I don't know how far they'll go to make sure I stay in the dark. I should probably stop here before I get carried away, but I wanted to set the scene. This isn't some mystery you can read about online and shrug off. This is real, and it's me. And it's only just beginning. After that night, sleep became almost impossible. Every noise felt amplified. Every creak in my apartment. Every car that drove by too slow. Every phone buzz that came without a name. I kept telling myself I was just paranoid, that this was all some massive coincidence. But when the private investigator, Mark, called me 2 days later, I realized paranoia was the least of my problems. He sounded off. Mark was usually calm, professional. That day, his voice trembled like someone was standing behind him with a gun. "We need to meet in person," he said. "And not at your place. Somewhere public. Somewhere loud." We met at a diner near downtown. Middle of the day, full of people, no blind spots. He slid into the booth across from me and didn't even look up. I could tell he hadn't slept. Dark circles under his eyes, jittery movements. He ordered coffee but didn't touch it. Then he pulled out a worn folder and said quietly, "You were right to trust your instincts. Something's very wrong here." Inside the folder were old hospital records, or at least what was left of them. My supposed adoption papers were complete forgeries. The hospital listed on my birth certificate didn't even exist under that name until years later. The doctor's signature belonged to a man who died in 1998. Mark said it was the cleanest fake he'd seen in 20 years. Whoever did this had money, power, and government-level connections. But that wasn't what shook me. It was the photo. A black and white hospital picture of a newborn wrapped in a blanket. Me. Except, in the background, blurred but still visible, were two figures, both wearing suits, both watching through the nursery glass. And one of them, Mark pointed out, matched a man he found tied to a group under investigation for human behavioral research. Human behavioral research sounded like some psychology department grant project until he showed me what he'd found. It wasn't research in the academic sense. It was experimentation. Private, unregulated, government adjacent. Infants born to volunteer mothers and placed into controlled family environments for observation. Except, according to the files, not all those mothers had volunteered. That's when the bottom fell out. Because that observation program had been linked to a company that later changed names, twice. The last registered name matched the one tied to my birth mother's fake identity. I remember just sitting there, staring at that photo, while the diner's cheap pop music hummed in the background. It was like the world had split into two layers, one that looked normal and one that was rotting underneath. I asked Mark what he thought it meant, and he said something that still makes my stomach drop when I replay it. "It means you weren't just adopted, kid. You were placed." The next week was a blur. I tried to go back to my normal life, but normal didn't exist anymore. I started noticing how many cameras were around my apartment. The white van parked across the street that seemed to move a few feet every day. The random maintenance guy who claimed to be fixing a water pressure issue, even though my complex didn't schedule one. Then Mark disappeared. He stopped answering calls. His number went dead. I drove to his office. Lights off, door locked. His secretary said he'd taken a sudden trip out of state, but her eyes darted around too much when she said it. 2 days later, I got a message on an encrypted app I'd never downloaded. It just said, "Stop. You're next." That night, I packed a bag and drove 3 hours north to stay with an old college friend, Nate. He was one of those guys who worked in cybersecurity, always paranoid about digital footprints. When I told him what was happening, he didn't laugh. He went pale. "You're probably already flagged," he said, typing furiously. "If what you're describing is real, they're not random criminals. They have infrastructure." He set up a burner laptop, got into some deep web records, and within an hour, he found the company that had funded the research. On paper, it was a biotech firm. In reality, it was funneling money to a network of clinics that had quietly shut down decades ago, all under sealed investigations for unethical human trials. The kicker? The last active file Nate found was from 2002, the year I was born. There was a note attached to the last entry, a list of successful placements with only first initials and hospital codes. Mine matched. It was past midnight by then. We were both sitting in the dark, lit only by his monitor, when he said, "I think your family might not be just covering this up. They might be part of it." I felt my throat close. Everything I'd ever thought about my life, my parents, my childhood, my memories, it all started unraveling. I wanted to call my mom right then, demand answers, but Nate stopped me. "You call them now. They'll know you're onto them," he said. "You need to stay off the grid until we figure out who's pulling the strings." The next morning, Nate went to grab coffee, and when he came back, there was an envelope taped to his door. No address, no stamp, just my name in block letters. Inside was a single photo, me, sitting in that diner with Mark, taken from outside the window. That was the moment I realized how deep this went. Someone had eyes on me every step of the way. They'd known where I was, who I met, even what time I'd leave the building. Nate scanned the envelope for fingerprints. Nothing. Whoever sent it knew exactly how to leave no trace. He told me we needed to disappear for a while, maybe drive cross-country, lay low. But before we could even plan, something else happened. My apartment back home burned down. Electrical fire, they said. Total loss. The fire department called it an accident, but I hadn't been there in days. Now I'm writing this from a motel off I-94. The curtains are drawn, and my phone's wrapped in aluminum foil because Nate says it's safer that way. I don't know who to trust, and the only thing I know for sure is that my real family isn't just hiding. They're part of something organized, something that's been running for decades. And if they went through all this to bury the truth, what happens when I dig it up completely? I didn't plan to contact anyone from my biological family. After everything that had happened, I just wanted to breathe, to think. But curiosity isn't something you can just shut off, especially when your entire existence suddenly feels like a lie. It was Nate who found her, the first real lead. Her name was Anna Keller, the woman listed as my birth mother in the altered files. He tracked her through an old property tax database tied to a now-defunct estate in rural Wisconsin. No social media, no phone number, no digital trace. It was like she'd been scrubbed off the grid entirely. For 3 nights, I stared at her name, wondering if she was even alive. Part of me hoped she wasn't, because if she was, that meant she had chosen to abandon me into whatever twisted project I'd been part of. But another part of me, the desperate part, needed to see her face. To ask why? So I drove out there. Middle of nowhere. 2-lane roads swallowed by trees. No cell service for miles. The house sat back from the road, surrounded by overgrown grass and rusted fencing. It looked like no one had lived there in years, but the curtains in one upstairs window were drawn tight. Too tight for an abandoned place. I parked a little down the road and walked up, rehearsing what I'd say if someone answered. But when I knocked, the door opened just enough for me to see a pair of eyes staring through the gap. A woman's voice, hoarse and wary, said, "You shouldn't be here." "Anna?" I asked. "My name's." "I know who you are." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a second, I thought I saw recognition. Not surprise, not confusion, but guilt. She opened the door wider, just enough for me to see her properly. Mid-40s, maybe 50s. Tired eyes, thin frame, wearing an oversized sweater like she was trying to disappear into it. There was a heaviness in the air, like the house itself was holding its breath. We sat in the living room. It smelled like old paper and mildew. A single lamp lit the room, though it was midday. She kept glancing at the window, like she expected someone to show up. I didn't even know where to start, so I just blurted out, "Why did you give me up?" Her hands started shaking. "It wasn't supposed to happen like that," she whispered. "They told me it was an adoption. They said you'd be safe." "Who told you?" She didn't answer, just kept wringing her hands, whispering, "You weren't supposed to find me." I pressed harder. "Was it a company? A research group? What did they do?" That's when she looked up, and her expression changed. Not fear, but sheer panic. "You need to leave. Right now." Before I could ask why, headlights cut across the window. A car had pulled up the driveway. Anna's face went white. She stood, grabbed my wrist, and hissed, "Back door. Go." I didn't move. "Who is it?" "They found you," she whispered. "They always find you." I barely had time to process that before the front door burst open. 2 men stepped inside, dressed in plain clothes, but everything about them screamed authority. The first one was tall, with sharp features and the kind of posture that comes from a lifetime of control. The second was silent, scanning the room like he'd done it 1,000 times before. Anna stepped in front of me, trembling but defiant. "He doesn't know anything," she said. The tall one smiled, cold, polite. "Then this won't take long." He reached inside his coat, and that's when I bolted. Out the back door, through the trees, sprinting until my lungs burned. I didn't stop until I hit the road, dove into my car, and peeled out of there so fast I nearly spun into a ditch. I didn't go back to Nate's. I didn't even tell him what happened until hours later when I found a payphone in some forgotten gas station. When I told him what I'd seen, he cursed under his breath and said, "They're not just covering this up, they're managing it." That word, managing, stuck with me. Like I was a problem they were trying to contain, not erase. Over the next week, I tried to find any record of Anna. Nothing. The property records were wiped within 48 hours. The address no longer existed on Google Maps. Even her name, when I ran it again through the database Nate had used, came up blank, like she'd never existed. But 2 days later, I got a package. No return address. Inside was a single USB drive and a note written in shaky handwriting. "For when they come for you too." I plugged it into Nate's secure laptop, and for a long time, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared, Project Calyx. Inside were encrypted documents, some labeled with codes, others with initials, and one folder marked Subject Group 7A. My initials were on the first file. It listed my birth date, location, and a cryptic term next to genetic evaluation status, anomalous behavioral response. Underneath was a line that made my skin crawl. Ongoing observation recommended. Placement successful. Nate read it 3 times, then said quietly, "This wasn't just about controlling environment. They were studying something biological, something in you." I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think my life was some kind of lab note. But it explained too much. The secrecy, the erased records, the way they always seemed one step ahead. Then the real kicker came. Buried in a folder labeled Transfer Requests was another name, mine, listed next to a pending approval dated 2 weeks from now. The location field was blank, but the note underneath said, "Retrieve and reassign subject upon contact confirmation." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about my past. It was about my future. They weren't done with me. I shut the laptop, looked at Nate, and said, "They're planning to take me." He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and said, "Then we disappear. For real this time." We packed up everything we could carry and ditched the rest. Nate wiped every trace of our digital presence, burned the USB, and tossed it into a river on our way out of town. But even now, driving through endless highways with no destination, I can't shake the feeling that someone's following us. Every time a car stays behind us for too long, every time a motel clerk asks for my ID, every time I see a face that looks too familiar in a crowd, I feel it. They haven't stopped watching. And something tells me, Anna wasn't the only one who knew what I really am. We drove for 3 straight days before we finally stopped. Nate said the key was to keep moving. Never use the same motel twice. Never pay with cards. Never stay in cities with security cameras at every intersection. By day 4, we were somewhere in Montana, the kind of place where gas stations doubled as diners and no one cared who you were as long as you paid cash. But running doesn't make you safe. It just gives you time to think. And the more I thought, the more the pieces didn't add up. Why me? Why any of this? If it was just about observation or data, why go through the trouble of threats, surveillance, arson? Nate thought he had an answer. He said, "There's a missing link we haven't seen yet." Calyx wasn't just research, it was recruitment. He'd spent the drive running algorithms offline, trying to decode fragments from that burned USB. Some of it survived in the temporary cache, enough for him to piece together what he called metadata trails. One of the names that popped up was Dr. Lenora Gates, listed as Program Director, Phase 3. According to a few old academic archives, she'd been a geneticist who disappeared in 2004, right after Calyx went dark. We found her last known address near Spokane. I didn't want to go. I was done chasing ghosts. But Nate said if we didn't understand what they wanted from me, we'd never know when or how they'd come back. So we went. The house looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Boarded windows, weeds waist-high, a rusted mailbox that still had her name half visible. The air around the place felt wrong. Still, too quiet. Nate checked for tripwires. Yes, he actually knew how to do that, and we went inside. Most of the furniture was gone, but the walls were covered in papers. Handwritten notes, chemical diagrams, newspaper clippings, photos of children. Dozens of them. Their faces were blurred in some, circled in others. And in the center of one wall, pinned like a centerpiece, was a large photo of me as a kid, maybe 7 or 8, standing outside my old elementary school. I don't remember anyone taking that photo. Below it, written in shaky handwriting, Subject 7A, primary line viable. Nate's voice was barely a whisper. They've been watching you since before you even knew. I wanted to leave. I wanted to burn that entire house to the ground. But before I could say anything, we heard something outside. Tires on gravel. A door slam. Nate peeked through the blinds, then turned pale. Black SUV, he whispered. 2 of them. We didn't think. We just ran. Out the back door, through the tall grass, cutting across the woods behind the property. We heard shouting, footsteps, and then a gunshot. The sound tore through the air, so loud it felt like it ripped the world open. We ran until our legs gave out. By the time we found a road, our clothes were torn, faces scratched from branches, lungs burning. We flagged down a trucker, told him we'd been hiking and got lost. He didn't ask questions, just dropped us at a town a few miles away. At a 24-hour diner, while I tried to steady my shaking hands, Nate said, "They didn't just want you. They wanted something inside you. Look." He turned his laptop around. He'd pulled up more fragments from the Calyx cache. A document labeled Heritable Response Patterns, Series 7. It talked about behavioral triggers, latent conditioning, and subject activation protocols. It sounded like science fiction until he scrolled down and showed me the line that made my stomach turn. Observation complete. External stimuli successful. Initiate recall sequence. Recall sequence. I stared at those words until they blurred. You think they're trying to bring people back? Nate nodded slowly. You, Anna, maybe others. You're not random. You were designed for something. That word, design, didn't sit right. I wanted to believe he was exaggerating, but everything pointed toward it. A program that never ended. Children placed with chosen families. Monitored for years. I remember saying, if they built something into us, how would we even know? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. We decided to drive through the night again. But halfway through Idaho, our car started acting up, dashboard lights flickering, engine jerking. Nate cursed, pulled over at a gas station to check it. That's when we saw it, a small black device, magnetized to the underside of the rear bumper. A tracker. We ripped it off and smashed it underfoot. I could barely breathe. It meant they'd been following us since the start. Maybe longer. Nate said we needed to split up. It'd make it harder for them to track both of us. I didn't want to. He said he'd draw attention west while I went east. If you get caught, they'll disappear you, he said. If I do, I'm just a tech guy who snooped too deep. I watched him drive off into the dark, taillights fading into nothing. That was the last time I saw him. 2 days later, I got an anonymous text. Your friend was right. They're recalling you. No number, no name. Just that. I didn't sleep for 2 nights straight. Every noise sounded like footsteps. Every reflection looked like someone watching. I started seeing cars I'd swear I'd seen before. Always different colors, different plates, but same make, same models. Black SUVs. Then last night, I heard it again. That same heavy breathing call I got months ago. Only this time, a voice followed it. Calm. Almost kind. You've gone far enough. You were never meant to remember. I froze. My body locked up, like every muscle forgot how to move. The line went dead, but the sound of my own heartbeat filled the silence. I don't know what recall means exactly, but it feels like it's already happening. The headaches, the gaps in memory, the sense that I'm forgetting pieces of conversations hours after they happen. Nate warned me about behavioral conditioning. I laughed then. I'm not laughing now. Every time I look in the mirror, I feel like I'm seeing someone who doesn't belong to me. Like there's a version of myself buried under my skin, and they're trying to wake him up. I don't know what I'm running from anymore. Them, myself, or whatever they put inside me. But something tells me this is far from over. Because last night, taped to my motel door, was a single note. No threats. No names. Just one line. Welcome home, 7A. When I saw that note taped to the door, I didn't move for a long time. Just stood there, staring at it while the hallway light flickered above me like something out of a bad horror movie. My first instinct was to run, again. But some part of me was tired. Tired of the fear, the constant moving, the not knowing who I really was. If they wanted to find me, fine. Maybe it was time I stopped hiding and found out why. I packed my bag, grabbed the burner phone, and drove. No destination, just instinct. Hours later, my GPS, which I hadn't even turned on, lit up by itself. A blue line appeared on the screen, leading me toward an address in upstate Minnesota. No app was open. No voice prompted me. It just appeared. That's when I knew they weren't chasing me anymore. They were guiding me. I drove through the night, numb. The address led to a facility deep in the woods. No signs, no gates, just a narrow road ending at a massive concrete structure with lights buried under the trees. The place looked abandoned from a distance, but the faint hum of electricity said otherwise. For a long time, I just sat there in the car, engine idling, staring at the building. My whole life had been pushing me to this moment. Every lie, every strange coincidence, every missing record. And now that I was here, all I felt was this hollow dread in my chest. I stepped out. The cold hit immediately, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The front doors were unlocked. Inside, everything smelled of dust and metal. Long hallways, empty rooms. I passed old labs with rusted tables and shattered monitors. Then I found it, a control room still running on backup power, screens flickering faintly. And on one of those screens, my face. Live feed. I spun around, but no one was there. Then a voice echoed from behind me. I was wondering when you'd come home. It was a woman's voice, calm, steady, and painfully familiar. I turned, and there she was, Anna, my birth mother. She looked exactly the same, like she hadn't aged a day since I'd last seen her. I don't understand, I managed. You were scared. You told me to run. She smiled sadly. Because that's what they programmed me to do. The words didn't make sense. I must have looked confused, because she stepped closer and said quietly, "You think you were the only one they made?" Then she pointed at the monitor wall, and the screens flickered to life. Dozens of faces appeared. Men, women, children, all with the same file code, 7A, 1, 7A, 2, 7A, 3, all the way down. Calyx wasn't a single experiment, she said. It was a generation program. You're part of a lineage, genetic lines designed to test adaptability, emotional resilience, and obedience. They used us to create you. And they've been tracking every behavioral response since birth. My throat tightened. Used you? She nodded slowly. They monitored how far we'd go to protect you, how much pain we'd endure before we broke. They called it maternal conditioning. I was their first subject. My stomach turned. So what am I? Her voice cracked. You're the proof they succeeded. The words hit harder than any bullet could have. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but every weird memory, every blank space, every time I'd felt like someone else was inside my head, it all started connecting. Anna stepped closer. They're activating the recall sequence. It's not about taking you. It's about turning you on. I stumbled back. What the hell does that mean? She hesitated, then said, It means your consciousness has been layered, conditioned responses built into your DNA. Once the sequence completes, the real you won't be in control anymore. Something inside me snapped. No, that's insane. Is it? She asked softly. How else do you explain the gaps in your memory? The way you ended up here without knowing how? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because deep down, I knew she was right. I hadn't decided to come here. I'd followed something, a pull I couldn't explain. Anna reached for my arm, her voice trembling. You still have time to stop it. There's a terminal downstairs. If you shut it down before the upload completes, you'll stay you. But once it's done, her eyes welled up. You'll belong to them again. The power flickered. Somewhere deeper in the building, a low mechanical hum started, rhythmic, steady, like a heartbeat. Red lights began pulsing down the hall. They've started it, she whispered. You have to go now. I ran, down the corridors, through heavy steel doors until I found the lab. A single console glowed in the dark, displaying my name and a timer counting down from 5 minutes. Initiating recall sequence, subject 7A. I started typing, trying to break through the code Nate had taught me, but the system fought back, rewriting commands faster than I could delete them. The hum grew louder. My head started pounding, vision blurring. I could feel something inside me, like pressure behind my eyes, pushing outward. Anna's voice echoed through the intercom. You have to fight it. They built you to obey, but they can't predict free will. My hands were shaking too hard to type. The screen flickered again. Suddenly, Every display in the room filled with my face. Different ages, different years, all saying the same thing in perfect unison. You were never lost. You were placed. I screamed and slammed my fist into the console. Sparks flew. The lights went out. The humming stopped. And then, silence. When I woke up, I was outside. The building was gone, or maybe I had imagined it burning. The air smelled of smoke and ozone. My head throbbed, and in my pocket was a single flash drive, the same one we thought we'd destroyed. Written on it in black marker, "You stopped them. For now." No sign of Anna. No trace of the facility. Just an empty stretch of woods and the faint sound of sirens somewhere far off. It's been 3 weeks since that night. I've been laying low, using a fake name, trying to feel human again. But I don't sleep much. Because sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake up standing in front of a mirror I don't remember walking to. And when I look at my reflection, sometimes it smiles before I do. I don't know if I really stopped them. I don't even know if them still exists, or if I do. But if anyone out there finds this post and recognizes the name Project Calyx, don't try to find it. Don't look up 7A. Don't dig like I did. Because once you start uncovering the truth, it starts uncovering you back. If you made it all the way to the end, thanks for sticking with me. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the story, consider subscribing to the channel and giving the video a like. It helps me share more stories like this. Thanks.